Welcome to The Culture. We rest at the pulse of the community, providing all things news, music, fashion, events, and everything that we talk about in between. It's a lifestyle. We are The Culture. Hi, and welcome to The Culture. It is wonderful to be here again with it's soon to be friend of the show, a personal friend of mine, Victor Williams, retired. I always used to say FBI agent, Vic, the FBI agent.
It's Homeland Security Investigation, HSI.
HSI. And he is the vice chair of Miami-Dade County Human Trafficking Coalition.
Yes.
And we are ecstatic to bring Victor onto the show. We want to educate all of our viewers, as well as your sphere of influence, on human trafficking and all that it involves. Who are those that are most likely to be targeted? What are the methods of recruitment? Where are we right now as a race in human trafficking? So first, Victor, let's just start off with the basics.
Mm-hmm.
What is human trafficking, and what is, if there is a difference between human trafficking and sex trafficking?
All right. So human trafficking first. There are three elements that make up a human trafficking situation. You have to have force, fraud, or coercion. Force is obvious. I beat you to make you do what I want you to do. Coercion is the threat of hurting you or somebody you love to do what I want you to do. And those are the two main elements. Fraud has been I haven't seen too many cases where we use fraud, but it's there. It's when you invite somebody, hey, come to Miami, be a model, or whatever you invite them to come to Miami to be, but then you end up forcing them into human trafficking by force or coercion. There is no difference. Well, there's four types of human trafficking. There's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, debt bondage, and one that we don't see in the United States a lot, organ trafficking. That's usually something that you see in Europe. We haven't seen many cases of that here, but those are your four types of trafficking. So there's really, in my opinion, there's really no difference between sex trafficking and when you say human trafficking, you gotta be specific. Which one are we talking about? And usually the two that sticks out the most is sex trafficking and labor trafficking.
And that takes me directly to my next question. Are there some misconceptions as it relates to human trafficking?
Yes, I mean, there's so many. That's why, when I work human trafficking, to me, it's all about culture. That's why I love your show. The name of it is because to me, culture is everything, right? And so when we look at, say, a victim of human trafficking, we think they want to be there. No one chooses to be there. And let me correct something. Those elements that I talked about only apply to adults. If you're a child under the age of 18, I don't need any of those elements for a human trafficking case. So if you got a child under the age of 18 that's being exploited sexually, it's flat out human trafficking, whether they look like they want to be a part of it or not. They can't choose to do that. So those misconceptions, that's a main one right there, that when you see somebody under the age of 18, since the laws came out in the year 2000, our first human trafficking laws, year 2000. After that, there was no such thing as child prostitution. They were victims, but it took the culture to understand that. I mean, I just left Georgia, where I was the human trafficking coordinator for the state of Georgia, and they just passed their law in 2019, no longer arresting children for prostitution. Now, there may still be some states out there doing that when they really shouldn't. So the misconception comes mostly from the cultural standpoint. We see somebody standing on the corner, oh, they must want to be there. That's why when we do human trafficking photos, we stop using people tied up in chains or tied to a bed, because it's easy to see that person as a victim. But the person that's standing on a corner or standing anywhere in our community and they're not tied to a bed, then you're assuming they're doing it because they want to do. But what we don't understand, if I have your mind, I got your body. If a trafficker got to tie you up, chain you to a bed, the word that they use, they haven't broken you yet. So basically, yeah, there's so many misconceptions just based on what we believe, what we're seeing based on our culture.
And that to me falls in line with, I believe, an arrogance here in the United States to think that there is no such thing as human trafficking within our borders, within the United States. Have you come across such a thought process?
Yeah, I mean, look, I started this journey in 2010, not really understanding. A lot of people looked at human trafficking. You use the word trafficking and you think you got to have a border crossing, right? But you don't. You could be born in Miami and trafficked in Miami. So in the beginning, a lot of people thought all this was happening to other people. But when you talk about human trafficking, like there's always been prostitution and pimping part of our culture, right? And we never looked at it as human trafficking. We just part of our culture, you know. But when we talk about labor trafficking, that's where you would see most people from other countries as victims because they use their status, their documents. Do you have documents? Do you not have documents? I'm going to turn you into Homeland Security if you don't work these extra hours or you don't take this less pay or give me half of your check or all kind of ways. And when we talk about labor trafficking, that's where we're all responsible. Even what I think I know about human trafficking, because if we're buying products from slave labor, whether we know it or not, it makes us all part of the problem. So, and creating a different culture is, hey, know what you're buying. How cool would it be if we actually knew what we were buying and where it came from? And I think the more that the community get a hold of that, we can force our government to put more information on products that we buy.
And Victor, who are those that are considered the most vulnerable? Who would those be?
Children. For children, definitely children. Look, I love your show the other day when you were talking about trauma and going deep inside. I love those shows because that's human trafficking starts at home. We hate the trafficker, but that same trafficker came from the same community in the home of that victim, right? And the best advice that I give parents is that, we tend to raise our kids how we were raised. And a lot of that is generational trauma, but we don't realize that. And what we got to know is human trafficking victims are created at home. It's the unresolved trauma that makes someone vulnerable. And traffickers are masters at they're masters at exploiting vulnerability, whether you're a child or an adult. So when you say the most vulnerable, it is children. They're vulnerable just being a child. And when I don't have that connection, like I said, I tell parents the best advice I get: have a relationship with your child that they could come tell you the worst thing that's going on in their life. We grow up trying to guide them. Yeah, we want to give them good information, but we don't want to drive a wedge just trying to be right as parents that our kids can't come talk to us. And that adds to their vulnerability to another 10 degree when they can't talk. So when I talk to kids, I tell them, even if you can't talk to your parents, every child needs an adult that they can trust and go to and tell things that are happening in their lives.
Mhm. Are there areas within the United States that fall for being an area that is known for more human trafficking than the other? And then also, where does South Florida fit in? I remember there was a lot of conversation when Super Bowl came here. There were even billboards put up all around the Tri-County area. Is it still the same? Was the problem here before Super Bowl and still here? Tell me what does location mean to human trafficking?
So I sent you some information. Polaris Project, they monitor our hotline. And it's really hard to get good numbers on human trafficking because the police don't have it as a checkbox on their police reports. right? So if I want to know how many burglaries that happen in my community, I could go hit a button and go, oh, boom, there it is. But when it comes to human trafficking, it's not there. One of the reasons why we're still trying to educate our law enforcement to a level to understand this, because that's a culture within itself that they have to change. So when we talk numbers, Polaris have been able to give us somewhat numbers because we go by the phone calls that come into Polaris. And so when we look at that, Florida has been number 3. Occasionally it's bounced to number 2. So we got California, Texas, and Florida are our top 3 states. Florida and Texas alternate occasionally, and I believe it's because we've really done a good job educating Floridians, this community. We've done a great job. So when those calls go into Polaris about human trafficking, a lot of times it's not like, what is it? It's like, look, I believe I got a human trafficking situation. So Florida has been number 3, alternating back and forth with Texas for a long time.
Mm-hmm. So as it relates to like this upcoming soccer match and F1 coming back in March, do you think that our numbers will increase during those larger events?
So yeah, wherever you got large events with men, that market is going to move in. We used to think Super Bowl was that number 1 event, but as I heard late about a year or so ago, the main event, believe it or not, is Bikers Week. And where do they go biking in Florida up north?
Daytona Beach.
Yeah. I was like, wow, I've never been there, so I don't know what those numbers are like, but I've been told that's usually like one of the number 1 events where that happens. But, you know, Super Bowl draws in a lot of people. And I'm happy that the NFL has taken up somewhat partnership with communities to at least address it. Major League Baseball dabbled into it with Albert Pujols and his wife when they were trying to educate their community about labor trafficking. I just did a human trafficking presentation for the NBA security conference before the season started. And it was taken very well. Everybody loved it. But my ultimate goal is to have the NBA do an awareness message for January's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. President Obama made January 11th Human Trafficking Awareness Day, but we celebrate the whole month to educate people. And so I'm hoping that we can draft something for the NBA, and whether it comes from the NBA into all the arenas, think of the millions of people they reach. Mm-hmm. And there's so many people that's still going around like, is that real? Because we only think about it with the movie Taken. There are people missing every day in our community. So that happens. But going back to the question you asked me before, where does it come from? It starts at home. It starts in our community.
Mm-hmm. And how are Black children more susceptible, or are there any statistics as it relates to Blacks versus any other race?
Well, we do see, people of color. We'll assume a lot that they are mostly victims because they come from the low income areas, which add to their vulnerabilities. But I've done a lot of work with Fort Lauderdale, and they've been the only city that I know, but recently we had a meeting to confirm what they're saying nationwide. But Fort Lauderdale was able to tell us where their kids, what community these kids were trafficked, ages, everything about these kids. But the one thing that always stood out that was shocking, no matter how many kids that were trafficked in Fort Lauderdale, 100, 50, 60, 80 to 90% of those kids were community kids. Who are community kids? Community kids are our kids that are not part of the juvenile justice system, kids that are not in trouble, with the law. And why are those kids so vulnerable? We had a judge, 16-year-old daughter, groomed online, trafficked for 6 months before they got her back, because the trafficker used, like what they're do is get these kids in a compromising situation, maybe a photo, or I'm gonna threaten to show this to the school, I'm gonna threat to show this, and kids react to that, right? I mean, there are kids that have been trafficked right in the home of their parents, and the parents don't know it.
And
So
this is going on online.
yeah, well, that's one of the grooming things that, you know, we reach out how they reach kids. And that's why it's so important, again, for parents to know what their kids are doing online. But to finish up that question, so a meeting I went to earlier this year in Orlando, we brought a lot of the service providers and law enforcement. We had a meeting there. And what we're learning is nationwide, the majority of kids that we're finding are community kids. So no kid, it's not just, yeah, those kids that are living in, you know, really poor neighborhoods. Yeah, it adds to their vulnerability, but we're seeing a lot of kids that are coming from regular communities are targeted.
Now, you touched on this with the online and the recruiting happens in the home with the parents.
Yeah.
What are the ways that they're able to recruit? You gave me some examples of how they would respond, but what are some other ways that these traffickers would recruit our children?
Well, it's sad to say, but sometimes they use other trafficking victims. You know, it's part of their job to go out and recruit. So if you see a young lady in a car, say I'm a trafficker, I'm going to have a couple of ladies with me to make the target a little bit more like, oh, there's some girls in the car, so they must be cool. So they recruit from schools. If you Google Sarasota trafficking, back, I think it was 2017 or 18, the whole school, not the entire school, but the half the school was being trafficked for money and booze. So this is a high school, right? And I mean, it's just so many ways. When we went through COVID, we saw the numbers of online connections with children because they're at home, they're online. The parents are doing work over here, not really paying attention to what the kids doing over here. Traffickers get on games pretending to be kids. There's just so many ways. One of the things that brought out the why I did the presentation for the NBA back in April of this year, a father took his 15-year-old daughter to a Dallas Mavericks game, and she went to the bathroom, and the next time she saw her dad or he saw his daughter was 11 days later when they had found her in the neighboring state, Oklahoma, being trafficked in a hotel for sex. So, I mean, it's everywhere. It's recruitment online. It's recruitment in the malls. It's recruitment wherever kids are. And they're just looking for that kid that's looking kind of down, looking sad, and just like a little, you know, approachable, you know. And that, like I say, that kid could be from a poor family or a rich family. Kids are kids. And they target kids. Hey, go get that kid, bring her to the party. Let's get her drunk. Next thing you know, they got pictures of her or whatever. So it's all kind of ways, all kind of ways. It just never ends. So everybody, especially kids, they're just vulnerable just being a child. Mm-hmm. And most of the people that I've come across that were trafficked in the past that I've rescued or worked with as adults normally started as a kid that was never recovered. And my question is, if we can't protect our children, what hope does those other victims out there have that are adults, right? So, but I have to say this community has done a lot of work. There's always more work to be done. Just to plug in a group that I was working with this past weekend, Girl Power. I don't know if you've heard of them.
I have.
Yeah, and one of their goals is to build what they call Hattie's House. So Hattie House would be for girls that are, they use the word at promise, not at risk, at promise, right? And so you got the at promise kids, but then when you have these young ladies that are aging out of programs, where do they go?
Where do they go?
And they're trying to build that space for them too, to help keep that continuity of connection and love, because that's what's missing, you know, and keep and let them branch out from there. So I am all over trying to support that program. And also, say again.
I said, shout out to Thema.
Yes. I mean, they're out, and I'm really happy working with them. I learned so much, not only are they doing Miss Hattie's house, but they're expanding the program. So one of the things that I'm doing to help them, a program that I kind of worked with when I was in Georgia as the coordinator. It was what was it called? The Children Advocacy of Georgia. And basically Georgia has 159 counties. Florida has 67. And they were in 53 of the counties. And Girl Power wants to expand out throughout the state. And we need that. We need that very badly.
I have two more questions for you. I know I only said 20 minutes, but two things. You mentioned abduction with the NBA game. I've been seeing some things go viral on social media. So, for example, I would see money on the wipers of a person's car or the zip tag on the knob. And then they would say, it was reported that these were things that they would place on women's cars just to get them to try to fumble with them in order for them to be abducted. Is there any truth to that?
I've heard a lot of that. I don't know if I've seen any cases yet, but yeah, it's so weird. Like, be careful if a guy give you a flower. Don't go smelling it from a stranger because it may be laced with something. You find $1 on the ground, you pick it up, it's laced with something. You go to your car, you got a little piece of paper stuck in your window, it's laced with something. So I've been hearing a lot of that. And whether I've seen the cases or not, it sounds very valuable. I mean, that it could happen. So we need to be concerned and educate our community about that.
And then if there are things that someone sees a situation that doesn't look quite right, a young girl with a man, or it just doesn't seem like it's the correct situation, it's a compromising situation. What do people do to report it and to try to get the person who they think may be in trouble some help?
Well, I always tell people, don't endanger your life. Just become a good witness, right? Take photos, get a license plate, get as much information that you can if you can't do anything physically, which I'm not going to tell people to go out and do that. I just want people to be a good witness and take as much information as they can. You can send it to your local PD. I know Florida, Kathy Rundle's office is one of the best, state attorneys in the country for what she does. And in this space. So they have a hotline that you can call. But the national hotline is 888-3737-888. That's another number. That's the national number that we give out for people to call. And like I said, just be a good witness. And when I was in Florida, we had an app called See Something, Send Something. And right now we're trying to work on something like that for Florida, where you see something, you're taking pictures of it, and you're putting it in that app that's being looked at immediately by somebody in law enforcement that can respond.
That's what's up. That's nice. We'll have to bring you back in January, specifically to bring awareness about human trafficking.
Yeah, you can't talk about it enough. It is the #1 crime in the world, in my opinion. And hands down. And just the fact that we're all responsible.
Right.
Because we talk about the sex, but we don't talk about labor trafficking that much, right? So we are responsible.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming, Victor. I really appreciate it. I know for a fact that the viewers are going to be able to enact some of the things that you've said. And if they see something, do something, call the number, report it. Our children are at risk. So we're going to have you come back in January if we can get on your schedule, always out of the country and here and there. But if you're not busy tonight, come back and join us for My 2 Cents. It's a live TV show. It's the shenanigans are in full effect. We talk about all the hot topics. And to you, Culture Family, we know we'll see you here tonight for another edition of My 2 Cents. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Culture is produced and owned